Hello, everybody. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, coming at you for another program on Facebook and YouTube. Today, I'm going to be discussing the celebration of Thanksgiving in Civil War hospitals. We're going to be looking at some short stories and vignettes of how doctors, nurses, patients, volunteers, and soldiers celebrated Thanksgiving during the Civil War. This isn't going to be a complete history today. There are those that can be found elsewhere, but these are a collection of stories that I have come across in my 7 years working at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. A fuller picture of these stories is going to be able to be found on our blog in the future, as well as in the museum's Surgeon's Call. That's a journal that is published by the National Museum of Civil War Medicine and made available to museum members. So if you want to hear more and read more about these stories that I'm going to tell today, please become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. If you haven't done that already, please consider becoming a member, becoming a donor, and supporting our institution. You'll be able to find information about how you can sign up and actually become a member today by going over to the comments section if you're watching on Facebook, in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and if you just want to type in the URL, it is civilwarmed.org/support. That's where you'll find out how you can support the National Museum of Civil War Medicine and programs like the one I'm about to give you all today. This is the perfect time on the eve of Thanksgiving to talk about how thankful our team here at the museum is for all of you out there, for you, those of you who have watched these programs, who have shared them on social media, who have liked them, who have commented and joined in an incredible conversation that we've had over these past few months. And just to tell you how thankful we are for all of you and to our members, to our donors, and to our incredible team of volunteers as well. Your generosity and time allows us to continue fulfilling our mission. And that is the mission to tell the incredible history of Civil War medicine and to connect the past to the present we all live in today. So again, if you'd like to become a member and become part of our incredible supportive team here at the museum, please consider becoming a member or a donor. You'll find information again in the comments section, the description, or at civilwarmed.org/support. So with all of that being said, let us dive into our presentation today. Let me pull up my screen here and awesome. All right. Again, my name is Jake Wynn. I'm the Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland. I'm actually coming at you from our location in Washington, D.C., the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum, where I'm stationed. And today we're going to be talking about Thanksgiving in Civil War hospitals. So without further ado, let's dive into that story. So I'm not going to get too much today into the origins of Thanksgiving. I'm sure most of you are all pretty familiar with the origins of the Thanksgiving story. It's as much a part of American history as just about anything, and especially in Puritan New England in the 17th century. So we're not going to spend too much time with the origins of Thanksgiving. Instead, we're going to flash forward from the 17th century to the 19th century and the early American Republic. As the United States, a young country in the early 19th century, as it grew and expanded on the international stage and the country grew larger and more prosperous, the concept of a Thanksgiving becomes increasingly popular. In the first half of the 19th century, America is also becoming a much more religious country as well. There are revivals and awakenings of Christian ideology and Christian thought in the early 19th century. And the United States is becoming a much more religious country. And it will continue on that path right through the Civil War years. And in many ways, the Civil War is going to prompt even more of that kind of introspection and clinging to religion. And this is going to play a part in the rise of Thanksgiving in the early 19th century and the lead up to the Civil War. This idea of a concept of giving thanks for to Providence for the bounties made available in this industrializing and growing United States is going to become essentially a 19th century version of viral, if you will. This holiday is going to spread out of New England and is going to go to states and localities all across the country in the early 19th century. Gradually, this Thanksgiving holiday that is celebrated originally just in New England is going to expand and be celebrated in October and November in other states outside of New England. As a native Pennsylvanian, I've documented in previous research of my own how the holiday came to my home region of Pennsylvania in November of 1845. And so again, we can think of this holiday as kind of going viral in the decades before the Civil War. And as it's doing so, this is kind of how the holiday is marked. You'll see this illustration comes from Harper's Weekly before the Civil War. Again, something that would be familiar to all of us living in the 21st century, an idea of a feast. You see family or groups of people gathered together, turkey on the table being carved up. These are familiar scenes, and they were in the 19th century as well. The holiday was marked by religious services. Thanksgiving sermons are given in churches all across the United States on Thanksgiving, and families and communities come together to celebrate, to give thanks for the previous year, and also just to get together and to be together in the early winter as the weather is getting cold, to celebrate what had been hopefully for most a successful year, although as we talk about with the Civil War, it is going to be marked by tragedy and also going to be marked by mourning. These Thanksgiving holiday is always one, just as our holidays are today, always one that mixes joy and also sadness as well. Giving thanks and getting together can bring out a range of emotions. But this is also going to be, interestingly enough, it's going to become a source of division in the country. And we've all experienced the divisions that are running through our society today. In some ways, are pretty familiar to what was going on in the mid-19th century. And Thanksgiving is going to get sucked into this divided political situation in America in the years leading up to what will be the Civil War. This is going to be along sectional lines, divisions geographically in the country. So let's talk a little bit about that. So this is a portrait of a very, I would say, handsome man who is going to be a politician that's going to play a role in the lead up to the Civil War, and also going to be important in kind of examining how the South looks at Thanksgiving, which was a New England holiday as its origin in the lead up to the Civil War. So this is Governor Henry A. Wise of Virginia. Many of you may be familiar with him. He is governor in Virginia directly before the Civil War, and is the leader of the response in Virginia to the John Brown raid at Harper's Ferry in 1859. So this is a powerful, kind of an important person to look at, and he was not a fan of Thanksgiving, as I'll get into in just a second. So there is a revolt in many southern states in the 1850s against this rising tide in the celebration of Thanksgiving that is really fascinating to examine, and it helps us to kind of enlighten a little bit more this divide in America leading up to the Civil War. So earlier in the 19th century, as the Thanksgiving holiday again is going viral and being spread out of New England and around the country to different states, it does end up in the South. There are southern states that are going to celebrate Thanksgiving in November with very much of their own spin on it, but some of the New England qualities are going to be present as well in the early 19th century. But as that is going on, there's going to be some in the South who are going to begin bucking that trend because of the sectional rift in the country that grew out of slavery and its expansion. The politics around those topics becomes bitter, and it becomes very much, again, a sectional divide, North and South. And so New England, where the Thanksgiving holiday originates, is going to be seen in the South as a bastion of abolitionist thought. And so this is going to lead some in the South to push back against these cultural traditions that are arising out of New England. And again, this all traces back to some of these political divides that are inherent in the United States that are really blossoming in the 1850s, as things like Bleeding Kansas, fights over the expansion of slavery, popular sovereignty, and ultimately, with Governor Wise here, the John Brown raid at Harper's Ferry is going to bring these tensions to a heightened state. And Thanksgiving, this holiday that we know of today in the 21st century as something that unites us, became very bitterly divided in the 1850s in the lead up to the Civil War. Governor Wise is among the Virginia leaders who refused to celebrate the holiday in Virginia or issue a Thanksgiving proclamation. Wise called Thanksgiving, quote, a national claptrap, and said it typified New Englanders to think that they could dictate upon God when thanks should be given or withheld in the United States. So I want to put this. I put this slide in here kind of as a note that this is going to be a pretty one-sided story today. Many in the South, especially when the Civil War breaks out, Thanksgiving and its connections to New England are going to rule it out as a holiday that can be celebrated in November with many of the cultural themes that we know of today. That doesn't mean that the South isn't going to have Thanksgivings. They will, numerous times through the Civil War, but they are going to be very far removed from the holiday that we know of today that was being celebrated across the country even before the Civil War. They're going to do their own thing. They're going to celebrate Confederate victories with Thanksgiving proclamations. They're going to have their own separate Confederate Thanksgiving that does not have really too many connections to the Thanksgiving that we all celebrate today. So we're going to not touch on that too much. Just know that all through the Civil War, Southern newspaper editors, Southern soldiers and officers are going to continuously comment whenever we get to the end of November and Thanksgiving is going to be celebrated by members of the U.S. Army, by members of the Lincoln administration, or by the North in general. Confederate sympathizers, those in the South, are going to continuously rail against Thanksgiving as this Puritan New England cultural claptrap, to use the words of Henry Wise, and to note that they felt that it was inappropriate to be celebrating such a holiday with all of the brutality and the slaughter of the Civil War, to gather together to have feasts and to celebrate the blessings of God, felt to Southerners that this was a Yankee tradition that should be done away with. So that's a little bit of setting the scene that we are going to be talking mostly about what's going on in the North during the war in terms of Thanksgiving, because again, that is the holiday that is most tied to what we celebrate today. So let's jump in. 1861. This is an illustration from the Library of Congress by Alfred Woad, showing a pretty rowdy, looks like Thanksgiving celebration in November of 1861. Thanksgiving that first year is going to fall on November 28th, 1861. This is going to be before the establishment of a national holiday. We'll get to that in just a bit. But there are separate kind of proclamations by governors and mayors, and ultimately the president of the United States is going to close down federal offices on this day to give thanks, to have a Thanksgiving. And so this is going to be the first wartime Thanksgiving, and it's going to be one I want to examine from a couple of different perspectives here. So first one, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the nation's capital. So that's where I'm at right now at the Missing Soldiers Office. Clara Barton was here in 1861, living here in this building where I'm sitting, and going to be out and about and experiencing Thanksgiving in the nation's capital. Here in Washington, this is going to be a city in 1861 with newly constructed military hospitals. They're going to be filled with thousands of patients during the Civil War. And that first Thanksgiving is going to be marked with feasts and Thanksgiving dinners in some of these hospitals. Not all, but some of these hospitals are going to have Thanksgiving dinners that are going to become kind of the normal operating procedure in hospitals across the North during the Civil War at Thanksgiving time. This is what a local newspaper wrote here in Washington, the National Republican, the day after Thanksgiving. They said, quote, "A bounteous Thanksgiving dinner was served up yesterday by those in charge of the Union Hospital at Georgetown to the patients of that institution, well enough to partake of the repast." So that's one example. There's not going to be too much to do about these big Thanksgiving feasts that are going to become the norm later on in 1862, 63, and 64. Very much the first year of the war, just like the conflict in general, is very ad hoc. Many of these kind of organizations that are going to carry out things like Thanksgiving dinners in these hospitals have not yet really coalesced into the organizations that they will become. So this first Thanksgiving is going to be one that is pretty ad hoc as well. But the same newspaper is going to note in Washington that things got pretty rowdy that first Thanksgiving at war. The report about the Union Hospital Thanksgiving celebration appeared directly beneath another newspaper article, which the editors complained about restaurants here in Washington, quote, "running at full blast, dealing out their poisonous drugs to soldiers and civilians, and leading to Washington being filled with drunken soldiers on a rampage on Thanksgiving evening." So this is a little bit more reminiscent of some of the antics we've all seen the day before Thanksgiving, as all college students come home from school and go out to local bars. Kind of the same situation going on here in Washington during the Civil War, especially that first Thanksgiving at war. So want to take a bit of a detour here to talk about some Thanksgiving notes in the Army camps around Washington that first year. Again, there's not all that many feasts and Thanksgiving dinners given in hospitals that first Thanksgiving, mostly because a lot of the hospitals didn't yet exist and the patient loads in those hospitals were not as large as they would become in later years as the battles escalate, as the casualty rolls increase, and as the number of those that get sick increases as well. So not too many stories from the first year in Thanksgivings in the hospitals. So I want to jump across the Potomac River from Washington into Northern Virginia and talk a little bit about how the soldiers experienced Thanksgiving. This is one Vermont soldier's account on the picket lines outside Washington. He succinctly wrote in a letter home to his hometown newspaper, he said, quote, "We had made preparations for a fine Thanksgiving supper, but nearly the whole of our regiment was detailed for picket guard. Consequently, we lost our supper and spent our Thanksgiving about 3 miles from camp with our rations of hard bread and salt meat, rather a poor substitute for mince pies and roasted turkey." So that's going to be an experience for many of the soldiers that first Thanksgiving. And I want to tell one more story that I have always found fascinating. Have pulled this out of my own personal research into a regiment from Pennsylvania. It's not a story from a Civil War hospital, but it very nearly could have landed one soldier in a Civil War hospital. So let me tell you one of my favorite stories from Thanksgiving in the Civil War. So this is a photograph of a soldier holding a turkey during the Civil War. Love this photograph. So let's talk a little bit about the 96th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. They're a regiment organized in eastern Pennsylvania in September of 1861. They arrive in Washington in November of 1861, just a few weeks before Thanksgiving. They originally spent some time in Washington before being dispatched to what will become their encampment in Northern Virginia, just across the Potomac River from Washington. For the entire winter of 1861 to 1862, they're going to spend their time out there. Because they are newly stationed and newly arrived, they don't have any preparation to be done for a Thanksgiving in their Army camp. Their camp hasn't really been established yet, and so the idea of doing a Thanksgiving dinner and a feast that they had been celebrating in their part of Pennsylvania since 1845 just wasn't really practical. So one officer did have an idea, and his family back home in Pennsylvania had an idea of maybe a way that they could celebrate Thanksgiving in this newly established Army camp that November of 1861. This is an officer named Matthias Edgar Richards. He was the adjutant of the regiment of the 96th Pennsylvania. He learns about a week before Thanksgiving that his sister and his father at home had planned to send him an entire Thanksgiving dinner with all of the trimmings and the sides through the mail in 1861 with no refrigeration. This seems like a pretty bad idea. And actually, Adjutant Richards thought this was a pretty bad idea as well. He knew this was going to be a problem as he had witnessed utter chaos in the postal offices and the express offices on his trips to Washington, where he knew he would have to pick up this package with Thanksgiving dinner for he and his messmates. So Thanksgiving comes, no package. And so Richards and his fellow officers decide, quote, to adjourn Thanksgiving dinner until the turkey comes. They didn't realize quite how long they would be waiting. Again, no refrigeration. This is 1861. So this package is just sitting in some office or on some train and is going to be missing for quite some time. By December 10th, again, Thanksgiving is on November 28th. The package was probably sent sometime on November 21st or November 22nd. December 10th, the package still had not yet arrived. Richards joked in a letter home that, quote, by the by, that turkey will be nice and tender when it does come, and nobody will burst a blood vessel in the attempt to carve it. A day later, on December 11th, the package arrived almost 2 weeks late. He described what happened next, saying, quote, everything was in good condition except the turkey, which had become moldy, Richards wrote to his father. Amusingly, he adds, quote, I sent it down to an Englishman in one of our companies who seems always hungry, and he actually ate the whole turkey, mold and all, clean. The mold was pretty thick in some places too. So this is where it gets a little gross. Richards and his fellow officers were astonished that he survived and in seemingly perfect health. The anonymous, quote, Englishman sarcastically remarked that it was the best meal he had had since he had crossed the Atlantic. This is the same soldier that Richards claims had undertaken a substantial feat earlier in their time in Washington, saying, quote, we sent the same man last week with the bread wagon, and between here and Alexandria, about 3.5 miles, he ate 9 loaves of bread before they stopped him. Richards noted in his letter home, he said, quote, small children are not safe in his neighborhood, I guess noting that he might eat them. Along with everything else, this soldier. So this could have ended very, very badly, but it is representative of a bit of the chaos of what's going on in the first year of the war, and one particularly nasty package that would have arrived with the Thanksgiving dinner covered in mold that one soldier did, in fact, eat. I will say that this kind of situation with food and being problematic with essentially food poisoning would become pretty common during the Civil War, understandably so, with very few food safety practices. These kinds of turkeys, like the one you see here, could become extremely problematic without that refrigeration and being lost in the mail. So let's flash forward 1 year to November of 1862. The Civil War obviously has worsened. Military hospitals across the country are going to be full. Despite the overwhelmed hospitals, many sought to provide comfort and a taste of home for wounded soldiers in hospitals. Here's a great example. Again, another vignette. Soldiers being treated at New York's famous Bellevue Hospital received a massive Thanksgiving feast, courtesy of the local ladies relief society. This is what was done for the soldiers on Thanksgiving Day, 1862. Quote, at an early hour, wagon loads of provisions were brought and tables spread in each ward. These literally groaned beneath the weight of good things placed upon them. Turkeys, chickens, vegetables, pies, jellies, and other edibles too numerous to mention composed the bill of fare. They were duly appreciated. The ladies arranged the tables. They enjoyed the happiness of those they so kindly befriended, and in the labors were amply repaid by the grateful thanks of soldiers. In Washington, dinners were served to patients at many of the city's hospitals, including one served up by the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury at the Branch Military Hospital here in Washington. On 12th Street, another celebration in Washington that is notable, is that volunteers hosted a dinner for more than 1,000 Black refugees who had sought freedom here in the nation's capital from slavery, many of them coming across the Potomac River from Virginia. By 1862, Washington had become a destination for those seeking freedom. Among those in attendance at this Thanksgiving Day celebration was Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. A refugee camp was later constructed just north of downtown, and Contraband Hospital was established there. This later became the hospital facility attached to Howard University here in the city. But unfortunately, this holiday in particular, Thanksgiving, was not just one for celebrations and feasts. There were also reports in Washington's hospitals of deaths that day. These are some of the deaths that were reported on Thanksgiving Day, 1862. P.S. Morrow, Company D, 43rd New York. G.S. Fullerton, Company K, 5th New Hampshire. D. Ritchell, Company F, 137th Pennsylvania. First Lieutenant W. Fitzgerald, Company C, 139th Pennsylvania. C. Lowe, Company C, 10th New York. J. Dietrich, Company D, 107th Pennsylvania. G. Meade, 1st New York, Company D. These are just some of the soldiers that passed away in military hospitals in Washington on Thanksgiving Day, 1862. So important to keep that in perspective, that patients are still fighting for their lives and in some cases dying, even on this day marked with feasts. So let's move forward another year to 1863. The war had become far deadlier and the results had become kind of murky. Not sure which way the war is going. There are some victories for the northern side during this year. Gettysburg, Vicksburg are two landmark victories for the northern cause at this time. But there's also southern victories towards the end of 1863. September of 1863, the Battle of Chickamauga turns back the Union tide in Georgia and Tennessee, and Union forces in the fall of 1863 are going to be trapped at Chattanooga, Tennessee. So things are conflict is clearly not on a path towards its conclusion. There is going to be yet another year of war. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how Thanksgiving is going to become a national holiday during this crucial year. So we're going to have to talk a little bit about the efforts of a newspaper editor and magazine editor, who you'll see on the right. Sarah Josepha Buell Hale had been trying for decades to land Thanksgiving as a national holiday, believing that it would heal a bitterly divided nation. She had a high perch to take on this effort. She was the editor of arguably the most powerful publication in the United States aimed at a women's readership. That is Godey's Ladies' Book. She wrote to Lincoln in September of 1863, seeking Thanksgiving to become an official holiday and to have a set date for all localities to celebrate Thanksgiving and to mark that important day. She wrote, quote, "Permit me, as editress of the Ladies' Book, to request a few minutes of your precious time while laying before you a subject of deep interest to myself, and I trust, as I trust, even to the President of our Republic, of some importance. The subject is to have the day of our annual Thanksgiving made a national and fixed Union festival. You may have observed that for some years past, there has been an increasing interest felt in our land to have Thanksgiving held on the same day in all the states. It now needs national recognition and authoritative fixation only to become permanently an American custom and institution." Lincoln's going to respond to this in early October of 1863. He is going to issue a Thanksgiving proclamation that is going to become a part of American history, a part of Thanksgiving history, and to set Thanksgiving on the course towards becoming an official national holiday. I figured since we're on the cusp of Thanksgiving that it's a good time to read this document, to go and actually read what Lincoln says, because there's a lot in here about where the nation was in 1863 and how people were thinking about the conflicts. So let's dive into his words here. Washington, D.C., October 3rd, 1863, by the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. The year that is drawing towards its close has been filled with the blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies. To these bounties, which are so constantly enjoyed that we are prone to forget the source from which they come, others have been added, which are of so extraordinary a nature that they cannot fail to penetrate and soften even the heart which is habitually insensible to the ever-watchful providence of Almighty God. In the midst of a civil war of unequaled magnitude and severity, which has sometimes seemed to foreign states to invite and to provoke their aggression, peace has been preserved with all nations. Order has been maintained, the laws have been respected and obeyed, and harmony has prevailed everywhere except in the theater of military conflict. While that theater has been greatly contracted by the advancing armies and navies of the Union, needful diversions of wealth and of strength from the fields of peaceful industry to the national defense have not arrested the plow, the shuttle, or the ship. The axe has enlarged the borders of our settlements, and the mines, as well of iron and coal as of the precious metals, have yielded even more abundantly than heretofore. Population has steadily increased, notwithstanding the waste that has been made in the camp, the siege, and the battlefield. And the country, rejoicing in the consciousness of augmented strength and vigor, is permitted to expect continuance of years with large increase of freedom. No human counsel hath devised, nor hath any mortal hand worked out these great things. They are the gracious gifts of the Most High God, who, while dealing with us in anger for our sins, hath nevertheless remembered mercy. It has seemed to me fit and proper that they should be solemnly, reverently, and gratefully acknowledged as with one heart and one voice by the whole American people. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And I recommend them that while offering up the ascriptions justly due to him for such singular deliverances and blessings, they do also with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it as soon as may be consistent with the divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. In testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed. Done at the city of Washington this 3rd of October in the year of our Lord 1863, and of an independence of the United States, the 88th, by the President of the United States. So, you've probably heard of that proclamation. I'm not sure if you've all read it or heard it ever read aloud, but it is a document worth examining in the history of the United States and in the history of how we celebrate Thanksgiving. But how did the nurses of the Civil War celebrate? This is a photograph of a kitchen in one of Washington's Civil War hospitals. I want to take the example of Amanda Akins, who served as a nurse in Ward E of Armory Square Hospital in Washington, D.C. Take a look at her diary, which was later published. She was a nurse through numerous major battles. She is going to be in Washington when all of the patients come roaring into Washington. Armory Square Hospital in DC was located on what is today the National Mall. The site of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum actually sits atop the location of what was Armory Square Hospital. In this account, I have 2 days of her diary that I'm going to examine with all of you today, from November 25th and November 26th, 1863. She talks a little bit about some of the work she's doing, whether it comes to Thanksgiving, how she's celebrating the holiday, but also just the work that a nurse did and the varied jobs that they did in a hospital such as Armory Square. You'll also hear a famous name in here that I'm going to draw attention to after I read our first diary entry. So, Amanda Akins, Ward E nurse at Armory Square Hospital in November of 1863. This is what she wrote in her diary. Quote, November 25th, I was in my ward all day and was very busy. I cut the paper for wardmaster to put over the windows where the old fringe was torn, which annoyed me so much all summer. New stoves were put in the ward. 2 of our worst cases were removed to Ward I and 2 others to K, as Dr. Bliss is at last sensible of the fact that we had more wounded than any other ward and too many for the good of the patients, so we feel quite relieved of care. After dinner, I found Sister S suffering from a severe headache, gave her an emetic. I made arrangements with a New York relief man who is to furnish Miss P and myself with oysters and cranberries for our soldiers on Thanksgiving Day tomorrow. There was music for an hour. Before I get to Thanksgiving Day, I do want to mention that you heard of Dr. Bliss in there. That would be the same Dr. Willard Bliss, who is going to become sort of infamous for his medical treatment of James Garfield after his assassination in 1881. I had to do a presentation on that. Some of you may have heard that presentation before, but this is the same Dr. Willard Bliss that is going to play a role later on in American history. He was actually the doctor, the surgeon in charge of Armory Square Hospital in DC through much of the Civil War. And he appears prominently in Amanda Akins' diary of her experience at that hospital. But this is what she writes on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1863. The unclouded sky and exhilarating atmosphere were types of the sunshine and joy in hearts made glad by a holiday. Our soldiers seemed to enjoy their freedom and the good things prepared for them. And as that is the one especial subject to which we are devoting ourselves at this time, we are happy too. We also had a fine dinner for which we were thankful, not having fared very sumptuously of late. Dr. Alcan having kindly remembered us by sending some of his nice French cordial with his compliments. We made ourselves quite merry with toasts, the first being to Dr. Alcan's health. Long may he wave, offered Miss Platt, to which Miss A added, before the grass grows over his grave. The band of music I enjoyed exceedingly. It was just the sunset hour. Sister Southwick presented me with Hospital Sketches by Louisa M. Alcott. Miss Marsh treated us with Boston mince pie at the chateau in the evening, over which we gossiped a while before retiring. I just love that account, get a little window into the life of a nurse in one of Washington's largest Civil War hospitals. So flash forward again to 1864. This is a image of a bill of fare for Thanksgiving dinner that is in the public domain from Jarvis Military Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, from November of 1864. So give you a look at some of the foods that are being eaten and being served in these Thanksgiving feasts that are common throughout the Civil War in these military hospitals. You'll notice a lot of these have modern parallels, that we can continue to eat these foods at Thanksgiving. That shows that this is a very deeply ingrained part of our culture, and the part of the way we celebrate Thanksgiving is you'll look at some of these meals and what they were serving during the Civil War and can see a lot of connections to how we celebrate the holiday today. This is a great example of what would have been seen in many military hospitals in 1864, but also what would have been served in these facilities, whether they are run by the military, whether they are run by relief organizations or local agencies. This is a good idea of what would have been available to those soldiers and patients who are being cared for in those facilities. So in slide 10 here, I want to take a look at one hospital and specifically tell its story. This is a photograph from another Washington area military hospital showing a mess hall with, as you can see, all of the place settings set up for the patients to come in and to eat. I do want to take a look at the experience of Thanksgiving 1864 in a hospital that is near and dear to all of us at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, because it was Frederick's longstanding military hospital known as U.S. General Hospital Number 1. It's located on the south side of the city of Frederick on what is now the Maryland School for the Deaf. One building remains standing from that hospital facility, known as the Hessian Barracks, a building that was built just prior to the American Revolution that is going to pull double duty and serve as a hospital in part during the Civil War. I want to take a look more in depth at the experience of Thanksgiving 1864 in the Frederick community and how U.S. General Hospital No. 1 played into that celebration. So this is going to come from a blog post that I did for the museum that you will be able to find at civilwarmed.org. And I want to take a look at that experience of what Thanksgiving was like in and around U.S. General Hospital No. 1. So let's take a look. Quote, "Many we know cannot offer joyful thanks today," Reverend Robert H. Williams told his congregation on November 24th, 1864. Newly re-elected President Abraham Lincoln had set aside the fourth Thursday of the month as a day of Thanksgiving. The residents of Frederick, Maryland gathered in the town's churches that day, many of whom were in the seats of the Presbyterian Church to hear Reverend Williams. Quote, "If we enter home today in any part of our land," he told his parishioners, quote, "we will hear a bitter tale of woe. The wife will tell of her husband who fell in the bloody strife. Some will tell of friends who suffered many months from fearful wounds." On the southern end of the city, Surgeon Robert F. Weir planned a Thanksgiving celebration that Thursday to benefit those recovering from those, quote, "fearful wounds" in the wards of U.S. General Hospital No. 1. As the head surgeon in the city's sizable hospital, it fell to Dr. Weir to suitably mark the occasion. Quote, "A sumptuous dinner will be given by Dr. Weir," the hospital's chaplain told the editors of the Frederick Examiner newspaper on November 23, 1864. "Let our citizens who are cordially invited to attend go prepared to contribute something to the comfort and enjoyment of the soldiers," unquote. The chaplain called on citizens to give donations in money and books to help replenish the hospital's meager library. The hospital had been serving the wounded, sick, and dying since the autumn of 1861. It had grown to include an entire campus with hospital wards radiating outward in a pavilion style. An observer in November 1864 described the conditions in the hospital that month. Quote, "I was peculiarly impressed with the capacity and conveniences of this well-ordered receptacle of disabled patriots. It is situated in the southern precincts of the city. The grounds are ample, checkered with plain and gravel walks, and enclosed with a neat and substantial fence. The buildings are commodious. The balance are wooden, nicely painted, and perfectly clean within and without, presenting altogether a picture of architectural uniformity and neatness. There are accommodations for perhaps 1,200 patients. Every consistent and attainable accommodation, every appliance for the mental or physical comfort of sick and wounded men may be found there," unquote. Surgeon Weir and the hospital's chaplain planned a full day of observances for the hospital and its patients. Their schedule included a service in the hospital's chapel at 11 a.m. with, quote, "a thank offering to be applied to the enlargement of the soldiers' library," and a Thanksgiving dinner at 3 p.m. The hospital's grounds would be open to the public, no passes necessary, throughout the day. Following services in Frederick's many churches, residents headed toward the hospital to mark the occasion with the convalescence. Quote, "At the hospital, the day was appropriately observed," reported the Frederick Examiner, "with quite a number of citizens lending their presence in order to assist in the celebration of the occasion. The dinner was heartily enjoyed by the inmates of the hospital, and the collection taken during the course of the day netted more than $50 to assist in the purchasing of new books for the facility's library." As the Civil War's bloodiest year came to its close, and citizens and soldiers alike realized they had a lot to be thankful for despite their dreary situation, Union armies were victorious throughout the theater of war. Slavery in Maryland had been peacefully extinguished, and the terrible hand of war appeared to have retreated from Frederick, Maryland forever. As Reverend Williams of the Presbyterian Church concluded his message on Thanksgiving Day, 1864, he alluded to the hopes and fears of future events. He eloquently summarized the thoughts and feelings surely felt by those in his divided community. Quote, "During the past 4 years, great changes have taken place. The changes of the next 4 years, no doubt, will be as great as though through which we have just passed. Who can tell what shall be the result of the next year? Probably, even in hostile territory, tears of real earnest sorrow may be shed over the graves and uncoffined and buried bones of our patriot soldiers. Probably, the scars received in battle may command the respect of all and be one qualification for honorable positions. Happy day when the paeans of victory and the sweet notes of peace shall blend beautifully together, when a mighty people shall lay aside their discord and man meet man as brothers of a noble race and sons of a free, united, and prosperous nation." That happy day, as Reverend Williams put it, would come after 5 more months of bloody and unrelenting combat. But the end of the war did come. And by the time we get to Thanksgiving 1865, the war is drawn to a close and Reconstruction has begun. I love this particular illustration, which comes from Harper's Weekly in 1865. It shows a soldier, his wife, placing a musket on the wall beneath another older musket labeled 1776. He's placing a new musket on the wall, symbolically talking about the end of hostilities, hanging it on the wall that is labeled as 1865. And on the right, you'll see a Thanksgiving services or those coming out of a Thanksgiving service. And you'll note there are soldiers there in uniform, but also a man on crutches who has lost a limb as a result of the war. So this is where Thanksgiving 1865, this is where the nation is kind of still recovering from the conflict. And as people have returned to their homes, whether they have a home to return to, the nation is beginning to move forward. And Thanksgiving, as we know it, is going to begin to move forward in the aftermath of the war as well. So after the Civil War, the holiday of Thanksgiving gradually took on the role that Sarah Hale so desperately sought. More and more Southern states took on the Thanksgiving holiday, many giving it their own flair, and Thanksgiving truly became a national holiday as we exit the 19th century and enter into the 20th. And the traditions that were existing in the 19th century become solidified in the 20th century and remain a part of our lives and our Thanksgivings here in the 21st century, as strange as they may be in the times of COVID and in the times of our own public health crises that we are facing today. So I want to thank you so much for watching with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Like I said at the outset, this is not an official history. This is not this is a series of stories, a series of vignettes that enlighten us a bit about how Thanksgiving was celebrated and how it changed over the course of the conflict, and also what it meant to the people who were commemorating it during the conflict, whether they were the nurses, the patients, the doctors, the volunteers in those hospitals, and how they felt about the holiday and its evolutions. If you did enjoy today's program, I hope you will consider supporting the museum by becoming a member or a donor. Again, you'll find a link to do so in the comments section on Facebook, in the description on YouTube, or you can donate by visiting civilwarmed.org/support. We have a fundraising drive going on right now. And so if you've enjoyed any of the programming we've done virtually over the last year, please consider donating to that. Every dollar helps us to tell the story of Civil War medicine and to fulfill our mission. We bring these programs to you all for free. So if you feel like you've enjoyed these programs, that they're worthwhile to you, please consider donating. Again, every dollar helps us to continue to fulfill our mission. Before I go today, and I'll end my screen share. There we go. Before we end today, I want to, I want to give a thank you to all of you out there who have been watching. This is a time to give thanks. I have some thanks to give here. I want to thank our incredible staff here at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. I'm incredibly thankful for all of my awesome coworkers who I've been able to work with and who we've gone through some struggles over the last year. I'm so thankful that I get to work with all of them. It has been a true honor to work for this organization, to be able to do all of the work that we've been able to do to, even though we've had struggles this year and museum was closed for more than 100 days in 2020, that we have been able to bring these virtual programs to go online, and our staff has been able to accommodate this, and my coworkers have been incredible, and I just want to thank them all for the incredible work that they have done. We have a great team here at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and I am very, very lucky to be able to work at this institution and to say that I'm a part of this incredible team. I also want to thank all of you who have watched these videos, who have shared them, who have participated. We couldn't be doing what we're doing without all of you and your support, and you've helped our social media networks grow incredibly in 2020. And so I'm thankful for all of you. Please like and share this video. Do what you've always been doing. Invite more people to like this page, to subscribe to our channels for more stories like this. We have more videos coming at the end of 2020 and in 2021. And we are just so thankful for all of you for your support. I hope you all have a happy and a safe Thanksgiving. We'll see you next time. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, signing off. Have a great day.